The bar was the kind of place where people went to disappear. Tucked away on the edge of town, it wasn't flashy or trendy, just a dimly lit room with sticky floors, a jukebox that played old country songs, and a bartender who didn't ask too many questions. It was the perfect spot for someone like Keanu Reeves. He liked places like this because they let him blend in. Nobody paid much attention to him here, which was exactly how he preferred it. That evening, Keanu walked in wearing his usual understated style, a plain black jacket, jeans, and boots. His hair was a little messy, but not in a way that screamed, "I tried." He slid onto a stool at the far end of the bar, ordered a beer, and leaned back slightly, taking in the scene around him. The bar wasn't crowded, just a few locals chatting quietly, some playing pool in the corner, and the hum of conversation filling the air. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. But peace has a funny way of vanishing when you least expect it. Doors swung open with a loud creak, and in walked a group of bikers. They weren't subtle about their arrival, boots stomping, leather jackets squeaking, and laughter echoing through the room like thunder. There were 5 of them, all big guys with tattoos covering their arms and faces that looked like they'd seen more than their fair share of trouble. Their leader, a hulking figure with a scruffy beard and a nasty glare, scanned the room as if he owned the place. His eyes lingered briefly on Keanu before moving on, dismissing him as just another face in the crowd. Keanu didn't react. He kept sipping his beer, pretending not to notice them. But something inside him stirred. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was years of playing characters who could smell danger from miles away. Whatever it was, he knew these guys weren't there to enjoy a quiet drink. Trouble followed them like a shadow. The bikers claimed a table near the center of the room, right next to where Keanu sat. They pulled out chairs loudly, laughing and slapping each other on the back. One of them, a wiry guy with a scar running down his cheek, stood up to grab drinks from the bar. As he passed by Keanu, he stumbled a bit, bumping into him hard enough to spill half of Keanu's beer onto the counter. "Hey!" the biker snapped, turning toward Keanu with a scowl. "Watch it, pal." Keanu blinked slowly, setting his glass down. He glanced at the spilled beer, then back at the biker. "Sorry," he said calmly, his voice steady. "Didn't mean to get in your way." For most people, apologizing would have ended the matter, but not for this guy. Instead of letting it go, the biker smirked, leaning closer. "You think saying sorry fixes everything, huh?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying the man. There was no fear in his expression, just quiet observation. If anything, he seemed almost amused by the situation. But the biker misread his calmness as weakness. Emboldened by the support of his friends, who were now watching intently, he pressed further. "You better start showing some respect," the biker growled, pointing a finger in Keanu's face. "Or we might have to teach you a lesson." At this point, the rest of the bikers joined in, surrounding Keanu. They laughed and jeered, clearly enjoying themselves. To anyone else, it probably looked like Keanu was trapped, outnumbered, and outmatched. But what they didn't realize was that Keanu wasn't just any ordinary guy. Beneath his calm exterior lay years of discipline, strength, and experience. And while he didn't want trouble, he also wasn't the type to back down when pushed too far. As the tension in the room grew thicker, Keanu remained still, his fingers lightly tapping against the rim of his glass. He wasn't afraid. In fact, he almost looked bored. But deep down, something was stirring, a familiar energy, a readiness to act. The bikers had no idea what they were dealing with. And soon, they would learn the hard way. The bar fell silent except for the faint sound of the jukebox in the background. Everyone watched, waiting to see what would happen next. What none of them realized was that they were about to witness something unforgettable. The bikers weren't used to being ignored. They thrived on intimidation, feeding off the fear they saw in others' eyes. But Keanu wasn't giving them that satisfaction. His calm demeanor only made them angrier. The guy who'd bumped into him, still standing too close for comfort, was practically vibrating with frustration now. He jabbed a finger at Keanu again, his voice rising. "You think you're tough, huh? Sitting there like you don't even care." He leaned in closer, his breath reeking of alcohol and bad decisions. "Maybe we should teach you a little respect." Keanu didn't flinch. His dark eyes flicked up briefly, meeting the biker's gaze before returning to his glass. There was something unnerving about how steady he was, like he wasn't afraid, or maybe like he already knew how this was going to end. The biker hesitated for half a second, caught off guard by the lack of reaction. Then, as if trying to regain control of the situation, he grabbed Keanu by the collar of his jacket and yanked him forward. That's when things shifted. For most people, having someone twice their size grab them like that would be terrifying. It would make them panic, freeze, or start pleading. But Keanu wasn't most people. As the biker pulled him closer, Keanu's expression changed ever so slightly. A flicker of something cold and calculating passed over his face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. To the biker, it might have looked like fear or maybe just resignation, but anyone paying close attention would have seen it for what it really was: focus. The leader of the group finally stood up from the table and stepped forward. He was big, even compared to his buddies, with arms thick enough to snap a chair in half. His scruffy beard twitched as he smirked, clearly enjoying the show. "What's the matter, buddy?" he taunted, crossing his arms over his chest. "Cat, got your tongue?" Around them, the bar had gone eerily quiet. Even the jukebox seemed quieter now, its cheerful tune clashing with the tension in the air. Patrons were frozen in place, some gripping their drinks tightly, others edging toward the exits. Nobody wanted to get involved, but nobody could look away either. This felt like the kind of moment that stories are made of, the kind people talk about for years afterward. The biker holding Keanu gave him another rough shake. "You hear me, punk? I'm talking to you," he barked, spittle flying from his lips. Behind him, his friends cheered him on, egging him to keep going. They were loving this, feeding off the drama like it was entertainment. If anything, they seemed to believe they were untouchable. And why wouldn't they? They were bigger, louder, and more aggressive than anyone else in the room. What could one guy possibly do against all of them? But Keanu wasn't thinking about odds. He wasn't thinking about consequences or whether he could win. He was thinking about balance, how every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And right now, these guys were tipping the scales way too far in one direction. When Keanu finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, cutting through the noise like a knife. "Let go," he said simply, almost casually, like he was asking. For the time, the biker blinked, caught off guard by the command. For a split second, he loosened his grip, but then he laughed, shaking his head. "Or what?" he sneered, tightening his hold again. "What are you gonna do, huh? Cry?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he moved. It wasn't fast, not yet, but it was deliberate. His hand shot up, grabbing the wrist of the arm that was holding him. At the same time, his other hand pressed against the biker's elbow, applying pressure in a way that made the joint lock painfully. The biker yelped, instinctively letting go as his body betrayed him. Before he could recover, Keanu twisted slightly, using the momentum to send him stumbling backward into one of the tables. Bottles rattled, and chairs scraped across the floor as the biker crashed down hard. The room erupted into chaos. The rest of the gang surged forward, shouting curses and threats. One of them lunged at Keanu, swinging wildly, but Keanu sidestepped. easily, dodging the punch like it was moving in slow motion. Another tried to grab a pool cue from the corner, brandishing it like a weapon, but Keanu disarmed him with a quick kick to the knee. Sending the stick clattering to the ground. Through it all, Keanu stayed calm. Every movement was precise, efficient. He wasn't fighting out of anger or desperation, he was solving a problem. And the problem was simple. 5 angry bikers, who refused to back down. The leader of the group watched all of this unfold with growing disbelief. His confidence wavered, replaced by confusion and then, slowly, by fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. Guys like him always won. They were bigger, stronger, meaner. So why wasn't this working? Because Keanu wasn't playing by their rules. He wasn't intimidated and he wasn't backing down. He was something else entirely. As the last biker fell to the ground, groaning in pain, the leader took a step back, his hands raised defensively. Whoa, okay, he stammered, his bravado crumbling. You've made your point. Keanu straightened up, brushing off his jacket. His breathing was steady, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the entire bar held its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. And then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind a scene that no one in that room would ever forget. The bar was a mess. Chairs were overturned, shards of glass sparkled on the floor like tiny diamonds, and the air smelled faintly of spilled beer and sweat. The bikers who had stormed in earlier with such bravado now lay scattered around the room, groaning or completely unconscious. It was hard to believe that just moments ago they'd been the ones throwing their weight around, acting like they owned the place. Now they looked small, defeated. Keanu stood in the middle of it all, breathing steadily. His shirt was torn at the shoulder where one of the bikers had grabbed him, and there was a faint bruise forming along his jawline. But otherwise, he seemed untouched. He wasn't even sweating. If anything, he looked bored, like this whole thing had been little more than an inconvenience. But for everyone else in the bar, what had just happened felt like something out of a movie. People whispered nervously to each other, pointing at Keanu but keeping their distance. Some were wide-eyed with disbelief, while others couldn't stop staring at the pile of bikers slumped against the wall. One older man sitting at the far end of the bar muttered under his breath, "I've seen fights before, but never like that," and he was right. What made Keanu's action so shocking wasn't just the fact that he'd taken down 5 grown men by himself, it was how he'd done it. There was no wild swinging, no desperate scrambling. Every move he made was calm, calculated, almost elegant. It was like watching someone solve a puzzle rather than fight. Each punch, each dodge, each twist, it all served a purpose. None of it was wasted. The leader of the bikers, the big guy with the scruffy beard, was still standing, though barely. He leaned heavily against the bar, clutching his side where Keanu had landed a particularly solid hit. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he tried to steady himself. For once, he didn't look tough or intimidating. He looked scared. You're crazy," he stammered, his voice shaking. "You can't just do that." Keanu turned to face him, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the man with those piercing eyes of his. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. The biker flinched, raising his arms instinctively to shield himself. Wait, he shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Okay, you win. Just don't hurt me anymore." For a moment, Keanu hesitated. Not because he was unsure of what to do next, but because he was deciding whether it was worth saying anything at all. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Next time," he said, "pick your battles better." It wasn't a threat, it was advice. And yet, it carried more weight than any angry words could have. The biker swallowed hard, nodding quickly. Yeah, got it. No problem. We're leaving right now." He glanced back at his crew, who were struggling to get to their feet, and waved them toward the door. "Come on, let's go." As they stumbled out of the bar, the room remained silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Everyone was too stunned to process what had just happened. A few seconds passed before someone finally broke the silence. "Was that real?" a young woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was sitting at a table near the pool table, her drink forgotten in front of her. Her friend shrugged, looking equally baffled. "I don't know," she replied. "But if it wasn't, then I need to start watching whatever movies that guy's been in." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the bar, breaking some of the tension. People began picking up chairs, straightening tables, and cleaning up the mess left behind by the brawl. The bartender, who had wisely stayed out of the way during the chaos, shook his head as he wiped down the counter. "Man, I've worked here 10 years, he muttered to himself. "Never seen anything like that." Keanu didn't stick around to hear any of this. As soon as the bikers were gone, he grabbed his jacket from the stool where he'd left it and headed for the door. The bell above the entrance jingled softly as he pushed it open, letting in a gust of cool night air. Outside, the street was quiet, almost peaceful compared to the storm he'd just walked out of. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, then started walking. As he disappeared into the darkness, the people inside the bar were already talking about him. Some thought he might be a cop or a soldier, someone trained to handle situations like this. Others wondered if he was just some random guy who happened to know how to fight. But one older patron, a retired mechanic with a love for action films, had a theory of his own. "That wasn't just fighting," he said, leaning back in his chair and scratching his chin. "That was something else. That was John Wick stuff." The comment drew a few chuckles, but nobody laughed too hard, because deep down, they all knew there was truth to it. They didn't know who Keanu really was, or maybe they did, but they understood one thing: legends don't die. They just wait for the right moment to remind you they're still alive. Back inside the bar, life slowly returned to normal. The jukebox started playing again, filling the room with soft music. Conversations resumed, though they were quieter now, tinged with awe. Someone swept up the broken glass and another person mopped up the spilled drinks. By the time the clock struck midnight, the only evidence of the fight was a few scuff marks on the floor and the memory etched into the minds of everyone who'd witnessed it. Outside, Keanu kept walking. He didn't look back. Whatever had happened in that bar tonight, it was over now. For him, it was just another chapter in a long story, one filled with quiet moments, fleeting chaos, and the occasional reminder that sometimes reality can feel a lot like fiction. And as he vanished into the night, one thing became clear: you don't mess with Keanu Reeves. Because somewhere inside him, John Wick is always watching. The night air was cool and crisp as Keanu stepped out of the bar, leaving behind the chaos he'd just caused. The street was quiet, almost eerily so, after the noise and commotion inside. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, walking with a steady pace, his boots making soft sounds against the pavement. To anyone passing by, he probably looked like just another guy heading home after a long day. But there was something about the way he carried himself, a calm confidence, an unspoken readiness that hinted at more beneath the surface. As he walked, Keanu replayed the events of the evening in his mind. It wasn't pride or satisfaction that lingered with him. It was a sense of inevitability. He hadn't gone looking for trouble, it had found him. And when it did, he'd handled it the only way he knew how: efficiently, decisively, without hesitation. For most people, taking on 5 bikers would have been unthinkable. But for Keanu, it wasn't about being brave or reckless. It was about doing what needed to be done, Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was stirring. The bikers weren't just random thugs. They were part of something larger, a world where violence and intimidation were tools of power. They wouldn't forget what happened tonight. Guys like them didn't let things go easily. Keanu knew this all too well. Whether they came back for revenge or sent someone else to do their dirty work, tonight's fight wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Meanwhile, back at the bar, the aftermath of the brawl continued to ripple through the room. People talked in hushed tones, piecing together what they'd seen. Some recounted every detail, exaggerating slightly with each retelling. Others sat silently, lost in thought, trying to make sense of it all. One older man, a regular who claimed to have seen everything during his decades in town, shook his head slowly as he nursed his drink. "I've been coming here 30 years, he said, his voice gravelly but steady. "And I've never seen anything like that, not once." His friend, a wiry guy with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, nodded in agreement. "Yeah, but did you see the way he moved? Like it wasn't even real. Like we were watching some kind of movie." That comment sparked a new wave of conversation. Someone mentioned John Wick, and soon everyone was throwing out theories. Was Keanu secretly trained in martial arts? Had he been in the military? Or was he really just an ordinary guy pushed too far? "Nah," the bartender chimed in, leaning over the counter. "You don't move like that unless you've got experience." Real experience. That wasn't luck. That was skill. No one argued with him. They'd all seen it, the precision, the control, the way Keanu seemed to anticipate every move before. It happened. It wasn't natural, at least not for most people. But then again, Keanu Reeves wasn't most people. By the time the clock struck 11 p.m., the bar had mostly emptied out. Only a handful of patrons remained, lingering over their drinks as if reluctant to leave the scene of such a surreal event. Outside, the streets were dark and deserted, save for the occasional car driving by. Keanu had long since disappeared from sight, blending into the shadows as effortlessly as he always did. But his presence still loomed large in the minds of those who'd witnessed the fight. For the bikers, however, the night was far from over. Razor, the leader of the group, and his remaining crew regrouped a few blocks away, nursing their wounds and licking their pride. They'd retreated quickly after the fight, unwilling to risk another round with the mysterious stranger. Now, huddled in a dimly lit alley, they tried to figure out their next move. What the hell was that? One of them muttered, wincing as he pressed a makeshift ice pack to his swollen eye. Who was that guy? Razor didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the brick wall, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face was pale, and his usual swagger was nowhere to be found. For the first time in years, he felt truly shaken. This wasn't supposed to happen. Guys like him didn't lose not to someone like Keanu. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tense. "I don't know who he is," he admitted, his jaw tightening. "But I know one thing. We can't let this slide. If word gets out that we got taken down by some nobody in a bar, we're finished. Everyone will think we're weak." The others exchanged uneasy glances. None of them wanted to admit it, but they knew Razor was right. In their world, reputation meant everything. Losing a fight was bad enough, but losing to someone who didn't even seem to try? That was unacceptable. "So what do we do?" asked one of the younger members, his voice tinged with nervousness. "We can't take him on again, not after whatever that was." Razor hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't want to admit defeat, but he also wasn't stupid enough to charge back into a losing battle. There had to be another way, a smarter way to handle this. Then, an idea began to form. "We don't confront him directly," Razor said slowly, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Not yet, anyway. First, we find out who he is, where he lives, who he knows, everything. Once we've got the upper hand, he trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. The rest of the group nodded, though none of them looked particularly confident. They'd underestimated Keanu once already, and it had cost them dearly. But Razor's plan gave them a sense of purpose, a chance to reclaim their dignity. Little did they know, digging deeper into Keanu's life would only lead them further down a path they weren't prepared for. Back at the bar, the last few patrons finally decided to call it a night. As they filed out into the cool air, they couldn't help but glance around, half expecting to see Keanu still lurking nearby. But the street was empty, silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Still, the memory of what they'd witnessed stayed with them, buzzing in their minds like static. One woman paused by her car, pulling out her phone. "I'm gonna look him up," she announced to her friend, Keanu Reeves. "Maybe he's some kind of secret badass in real life." Her friend laughed, though there was a note of curiosity in her tone. "If he is, I kinda hope I never piss him off." They both chuckled, but deep down, they weren't entirely joking. What they'd seen tonight had left an impression that wouldn't fade anytime soon. Legends have a way of sticking with you, even when you're not sure if they're real or imagined. And as the night stretched on, somewhere in the distance, Keanu kept walking. He didn't need to look back to know that the story of what happened in that bar would spread faster than wildfire. But he wasn't worried. He'd faced worse odds before, both on screen and off. Whatever came next, he'd deal with it, just like always. Because legends don't die. They adapt. They survive. And sometimes they remind the world why they became legends in the first place. The next morning, the small town buzzed with talk of the bar fight. News traveled fast in places like this, where everyone knew each other, or at least thought they did. By sunrise, the story had taken on a life of its own. People embellished the details with each retelling, how Keanu had dodged punches like a ninja, how he'd sent grown men flying across the room with a single blow, how his calm demeanor never wavered even as chaos erupted around him. Some versions were closer to the truth. Others sounded more like scenes from an action movie. At the local diner, where folks gathered for coffee and gossip, the conversation revolved entirely around what had happened the night before. One customer, a truck driver who claimed to have been at the bar during the brawl, was holding court, recounting every detail with dramatic flair. "I'm telling you," he said, leaning forward in his booth, "this guy wasn't human. He moved like water. Smooth, you know? Those bikers didn't stand a chance." Across the table, a waitress rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. "Come on, Joe," she teased, setting down a plate of pancakes. "You weren't even there. You're just making stuff up now." Joe pointed a fork at her, grinning. "Okay, fine. Maybe I wasn't there. But I heard it straight from someone who was. And trust me, it's all true. That guy Keanu, he's something else." Whether or not the stories were exaggerated, one thing was certain. Keanu Reeves had left an impression. For most people, he was just a quiet, unassuming figure who liked to keep to himself. But now, thanks to that night at the bar, he'd become something more, a local legend, a symbol of quiet strength and resilience. Folks whispered about him in line at the grocery store, debated his skills over beers at the same bar where it all went down, and wondered aloud if they'd ever see him again. Meanwhile, Razor and his crew were busy plotting their next move. The humiliation of the previous night still burned fresh in their minds, and they weren't about to let it go unanswered. After some digging and a few bribes to the right people, they learned a little more about Keanu. Not much, though. Just that he kept to himself, didn't cause trouble, and seemed to disappear whenever anyone tried to get too close. It was frustrating, but also intriguing. Guys like Razor thrived on puzzles, especially when solving them meant getting revenge. We find out where he lives, Razor declared, pacing back and forth in the dingy garage they used as a hangout. Then we wait. When he least expects it, we strike. His plan was simple enough, but there was a problem. None of them were eager to face Keanu again. They remembered all too well how easily he dismantled them the first time. Even Razor, who prided himself on being fearless, felt a flicker of doubt whenever he thought about those cold, calculating eyes staring back at him. Still, pride outweighed fear. If they backed down now, they'd lose everything: their reputation, their respect, their place in the hierarchy of the biker world. So they pressed on, gathering what information they could and preparing for another confrontation. What they didn't realize was that Keanu wasn't sitting idly by, waiting for them to make their move. Keanu, for his part, knew trouble wouldn't stay away for long. He'd seen enough in his life to recognize the signs. The bikers might have slunk off into the shadows after their defeat, but they weren't the type to walk away quietly. Revenge was practically written into their code. And while Keanu preferred to avoid conflict, he wasn't naive. If they came for him again, he'd be ready. But readiness didn't mean aggression. Instead of arming himself or fortifying his home, Keanu focused on staying aware. He stuck to his routine, keeping his head down and avoiding unnecessary attention. At the same time, he made subtle adjustments, choosing different routes when he walked, varying his schedule, and always staying alert to his surroundings. To anyone else, it might have looked like paranoia. To Keanu, it was just common sense. One evening, as he sat on the porch of his modest house, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Keanu reflected on the events of the past few days. He didn't feel anger toward the bikers, not really. In their own misguided way, they were products of their environment, driven by fear and insecurity. What he felt instead was a kind of detached understanding. He'd been in similar situations before, both in real life and in the roles he'd played on screen. Violence wasn't something he sought out, but neither was it something he shied away from when necessary. As darkness fell, Keanu stood and stretched, listening to the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, breaking the silence. It was peaceful here, far removed from the noise and chaos of Hollywood or the crowded streets of big cities. This was his sanctuary, his refuge. And if the bikers thought they could take that away from him, they were sorely mistaken. A week passed without incident. Life in the small town returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after a story like this took hold. The bikers, however, hadn't forgotten. Armed with what little information they'd managed to gather, they decided to strike under the cover of night. Their plan was crude but effective: surround Keanu's house, break in, and catch him off guard. They figured if they outnumbered him and caught him sleeping, he wouldn't stand a chance. What they didn't account for was Keanu's instincts. Long before they arrived, he sensed something was off. The usual hum of crickets was missing. The wind carried unfamiliar sounds: footsteps crunching on gravel, whispers carried on the breeze. Keanu didn't need to see them to know they were coming. When they finally made their move, kicking open the door and storming inside, they found the house empty. Confusion rippled through the group as they searched room by room, overturning furniture and shouting curses. Where was he? Had he known they were coming? Their answer came moments later when Keanu appeared in the doorway behind them, silhouetted by the moonlight. His expression was unreadable, his posture relaxed but ready. Without a word, he stepped inside, closing the distance between them. And then, just like before, he moved. The fight was quick, almost anticlimactic. The bikers swung wildly, panicked and disorganized, while Keanu remained calm and precise. Each punch, each block, each step, it was like watching a dance choreographed to perfection. Within minutes, the bikers lay sprawled on the floor, groaning in pain. Razor, the last one standing, stared at Keanu with wide eyes, trembling as he raised his hands in surrender. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "We'll leave. We won't come back. Just don't hurt me." Keanu didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, leaving them to pick themselves up and limp back into the night. As he closed the door behind him, he felt a strange sense of finality. This chapter was over. Whatever lingering tension had hung in the air was gone, replaced by a quiet peace. In the weeks that followed, the bikers disappeared from town altogether. Rumor had it they'd packed up and moved somewhere else, unwilling to risk crossing paths with Keanu again. As for the townsfolk, they continued to tell the story of the mysterious stranger who'd taken on an entire gang of bikers in one. Some believed it was proof that legends really do walk among us. Others chalked it up to luck or exaggeration. Either way, the tale became part of the town's fabric, passed down from person to person like a cherished memory. For Keanu, life returned to its quiet rhythm. He resumed his daily routines, blending seamlessly into the background once more. But those who had witnessed the events of that fateful night would never forget what they'd seen. Because sometimes reality can be stranger and far more thrilling than fiction. And as Keanu disappeared into the horizon yet again, one thing became abundantly clear. You don't mess with Keanu Reeves. Because somewhere inside him, John Wick is always watching.